Okay, now that we've talked about imitation and substitution, we're going to talk a little bit about holdup. Holdup diverts value to customers, suppliers, or complementers who have some bargaining leverage. They have bargaining leverage because they have something you need and can't get elsewhere. They add value to our customer or client, so it's important. Holdup is especially threatening when parties in a relationship had invested assets or have sunk costs that are specific to that relationship, so it makes it hard for us to exit that relationship. For example, an electric plant built at the mouth of a coal mine. Trucker or port worker strikes were ones that jumped out to me as we've seen those. I've seen them both locally and abroad when traveling, and the ports shutting down on the West Coast and goods not being able to move as a result, and the implications that had for inventories and access to materials needed by a host of other firms. Access to airwaves for radio or TV, hardware needs for software, and vice versa are other examples. So when we think about holdup, again, we have a set of responses that we can do, and they're oriented around addressing the risk, the probability of it happening, the implications if it does, if it's already taken place, how we're responding after the fact, so we can avoid holdup in some ways through contracting and good establishment of those contracts, integrating either forward or backward in our value chain, our supply chain, building the bargaining power that we have, maybe having multiple suppliers to us, or an increased stake in the business that we're dependent on, owning a greater percentage of it ourselves, hard bargaining at the front end before contracting takes place, reducing specific assets that we need in order to be successful, building rapport and healthy relationships from the start, and developing relationships that are mutually beneficial but also where trust is commonplace. Again, we're looking at risk management approaches, trying to minimize the impact on the company prior to what future issues will actually face, or prevention to avoid an undesirable future. So how does your firm and contrast that with how the two competitors address holdups? Where do they have them, and how might they navigate that differently or similarly to one another? And when you have a few ideas based on what we've read and what you know of the companies to date, just write some of those down. And again, you see the orange background, so submit those in to me if you're in our online cohort, because I want a chance for you to be able to weigh in like we would in class without always having to do post and reply. The last area that we're looking at is slack. Slack or waste within the firm dissipates value. It's sometimes hard to know. Often companies start to search for slack when profitability has been eroded, and we suddenly realize that we can't handle it the way that we have. So it can be hard to identify. If I have plush carpets, for example, for their own sake, they could be slack, but if they help me win customers or recruit new talent, then they could be a wise investment. Slack is thought to be large actually within companies, ranging between 10 to 40% of revenues, and I can assure you that many of us in our adult lives have experienced working for companies where we know that there's slack, we can see the inefficiencies, and maybe we've experienced times of business cycles within that industry that have forced some of that slack to be reduced, and initially it's met with a certain amount of stress and trying to create efficiency, but also people taking on larger roles, responsibilities, and additional tasks. So it worsens under certain conditions. it's in forgiving competitive environments. So where the competitive environment is more forgiving, it's easier to still be profitable. Slack actually increases. And settings in which managers have wide discretion over processes. It's one of the reasons that franchising tries to control processes, because they've tried to reduce the amount of the amount of slack, and to help someone who might be new to the industry to be able to compete well in it and not have lots of inefficiency or slack as a result of their lack of knowledge about it. So reasons for slack go back to the principal agent problem and how much we believe that people need to be supervised and managed, or else they won't operate at their capacity. That managers have incentives to grow the resources under their control, and so rather than reduce what we need to get the job done, getting more people, getting more technology, having larger budgets, there's some pressure on managers to actually see those numbers go up. And then free cash flow enhances a manager's ability to invest, and so the more discretionary money we have, we can invest it in some activities that are really healthy and good for the company, but then we might choose to use it or invest it in ways for the company that end up not panning out, having a negative return, and again, to just waste some resources. So as in the other three, there's responses to slack, again, thinking through how to manage risk. We can gather more information, we can monitor and measure behavior, we can set in place some performance incentives, we can try to shape the culture, reshape the norms of what's commonplace in our business setting. We can take on lean manufacturing, we can change some of the governance process, we can mobilize and kind of integrate change as part of who we are, that idea of a learning organization. But how does your firm, and again the two key competitors, how do they address slack? And you're looking at the information that we have. I know this is educated guesses, but we have to take the information we've been learning and apply it to real settings. And you can do this in your work setting, but for our academic purposes, we're applying it to your core firm. And because we want to understand that industry better, get some best practices, learn what we can from our own competition, we're also asking those same questions of the two key competitors we've taken some time to look at. So I think the way that you could do this best, potentially, is to start to do a competitive analysis. And what I'd like to do is have you use a framework similar to the one that you see in front of you on the screen right now. It's called a multi-attribute utility model. Just a simple spreadsheet that recognizes that multiple companies, which I've set up on the left-hand side, such as Blockbuster, Redbox, Time Warner Cable, and Netflix, who compete with each other in the same space, that there's multiple features that they're competing on, and it gives you a chance to write what you know about each of those areas and each of those companies. In your case, you only have 3 companies instead of 4, and you can use the competitive factors that I've listed there of price and quality, reputation, unique features, distribution systems, but you might also opt to use some other factors and eliminate some of these. And what I would suggest is, if you go back and look at the S&P or the industry report that we've utilized, is there are some key factors or determinants of success within the industry. So if you go back to that specific section and you use those features that might be the best for your company and the industry that they compete in. And again, you're just looking at 3 firms. So you see the orange background. This is what I'm looking for you to complete and submit. I would want you to have your company and the 2 key competitors. I'm suggesting you start with the 2 key competitors first, and mostly I'm asking you to do that because I think it's easiest for you to look through the lens of your own firm. And so I want to keep pulling you back a little bit to look through as if the first competitor was really your company, and if the second competitor was really your company, before you jump in and continue to look through the lens of your firm. Again, the price, quality, reputation through financial, you can feel free to use those same categories or criteria, but I also would encourage you to consider changing or swapping some of those out for key elements, key factors that show up in the industry S&P report. All right, so we had some in-class exercises that I typically do in face-to-face, and so if you're in one of our online cohorts, then what I would encourage you to do is work on this and again submit it to me electronically. The orange background is an indicator of something that I'd love for you to do. This would be perfectly fine to work on in groups of 2 or 3, and so if you work or collaborate with others in your cohort, please just submit 1 copy with all of your names so that I know that you've collaborated on it. And I would also just want to make sure to point out that for next week, for week 4, the preparation and the information that you need to work on is posted online. But for Porter's generic strategies and competitive advantage for the 2 key competitors, what I would ask you to do, again, you can do it individually if you're online, but if you want to work with a couple others, no problem. Prepare your analysis of the key competitors, which you did earlier, and then answer the following based on the case. Based on those 3. Do they follow a low-cost strategy or a differentiation strategy? Both your firm and each of the 2 competitors, you can answer that about. And what I will do is make your assessments available to others online through our Moodle site. Preliminary analysis, the second part of threats to sustainability and looking through the lens of being the key competitors to your firm. So again, this emphasis on these on this exercise is on the competitors more so than your firm, because I want you looking from their vantage points for a little bit to see what you can learn. And again, you can have you can work in small groups individually, but prepare an initial analysis that looks at the actual threats to sustainability of each that each competitor is facing and how they respond. So this is kind of a summary of the work that you've done up to this point as we've gone through the lecture. And so hopefully you've been able to kind of get a sense for what makes each of the 3 companies unique, and what are the particular threats that they face, and how might they approach them different from one another, and so that you can learn some best practices and get some insights from those other 2 companies. Thanks.